was the name of the steel plant, the steel mill that Carnegie had that he wanted to break the union? What was that? What was the name of the steel mill? Yeah, Homestead, because it was Homestead Steel, so Homestead Steel strike. And who did he leave in charge to break the union? Henry Clay Frick. And what did they do? What is it called? The process they used to break the union? Yeah, lockout. Locked them out. And who were the detectives they hired? Yeah, the Pinkerton. And what turned public opinion away from the union? Who tried to stab Frick? Bob, I guess it'd be a knife-wielding anarchist. A knife-wielding anarchist tried to stab him. Public opinion turned, and they sent in the troops. What was the affair where a bomb was exploded in front of police officers? Thank you. Yeah, Haymarket. And 3 days earlier, there was a general strike. And what did the workers want on May 1st? Yeah, 8-hour workday. Decorated. And who did they blame for the bomb? Kinds of labor, because they said what group? Yeah, a bunch of bomb throwing anarchists. Media matters. So we got to debt, right? Can we get overproduction? Perfect. Let's get going on that then. All these factors lead to debt. Overproduction. And overproduction because of more land. This sound about right? More land under the plow from the south or in the west. And also mechanization. All of these new machines were being invented. The mechanical reaper, the steam-powered tractor, steel-tip plow, the reaper's getting much better. Get back. Okay, we're starting now, we'll do it tomorrow. Sound good? And mechanization, things like the mechanical reaper, they start producing more. And the problem with this, you remember the boom bust cycle? This is what we call a hint, one of the most important parts of the cycle. Well, there's overproduction, which is the same as oversupply. They start producing more and prices drop. What do they always do if there's overproduction and price dropping? What do farmers do? Production, what do? Yeah, they always produce more. They always produce more, thinking they can sell a little bit more to get their way out of their debt. And so they would maybe borrow more money to buy more machines. Maybe they would buy more land. In fact, those two things exactly what happened to mine. Where were we? I know, but everyone's here. Did you get your drinks at the assembly? I gotta admit, that is pretty fun. So, they always try to buy their way out. I told you about my great-grandfather, my great-grandfather was on his farm. My dad was actually born on the Faircroft's farm. When prices began dropping at the turn of the last century, they did two things. They bought a little more land and they bought a steam-powered tractor, winning a great amount of debt for a steam-powered tractor, which you think is a big deal. Looking back at it, steam-powered tractor not as good as internal combustion engine. In 1911, my great-uncle was driving the tractor down a hill to take it from one crop site to another. It was right after a rainstorm, started sliding in the mud. He could not stop it, ran into a creek and destroyed the tractor. And that destroyed it. Because you still have to pay back the debt. They still owe 10 more years on the tractor. And that was just like the spiraling where they lost their farm and became sharecroppers. But they always tried to produce their way out. Farmers are much more susceptible to that. Next, railroads are what's called price discrimination. Railroads and price discrimination. Okay, railroads always do price discrimination for a couple different ways. And why are we? Now we're to tardy. Very tardy, almost absent. 5 minutes is absent if you're 5 minutes late. I guess the assembly ran longer for some people. So, monopoly. Monopoly and also price discrimination. This is all called price discrimination. I'll explain them both to you really quick. So I mentioned before, I think yesterday I did talk about the turn of the century, all this area, they started producing some of the best wheat in America to this day. Sees irrigation, but fantastic hardly. If you ever go to this area, the high line of Montana, you know how flat it is. The remnants of the glaciers left really productive soil, but it's flat as flat can be. Want to take a fun drive? Drive that. But now you can get your goods to market on the railroad, and that might be seen as a good thing. If for a farmer, hey, I can take my stuff to the railroad, but now you're dependent. You can't survive without the railroad. In 1900, there was one railroad that went to this island. One railroad. It was called the Great Northern. One railroad. Right here. So what can they do to the price they charge for? Because the farmers needed to ship their goods. Now, let's say this part of Washington, also very, very productive region, right here. Well, there's many railroads. There's the Great Northern, there's the Milwaukee, there's the Northern Pacific, there's the Union Pacific, and the Southern Pacific. Those are all major railroads. So what was the price here compared to here? What does competition do to prices? It was approximately 10 times more to ship grain out of Montana. That's how monopolies function. Hey, what's going on today? Well, today we have all railroad monopolies, but not everywhere. So here, there's one railroad, Burlington Northern Santa Fe. I'll start with the Great Northern, Burlington Northern Santa Fe. Kansas, also great meat production. There are 3 railroads that go through Kansas. The old Kansas and Pacific, which is now a big monopoly that goes here. The Union Pacific and the Burlington Northern Santa Fe. They charge about 5 to 7 times more on average here. So farmers in Montana just get nailed by monopoly. That's price discrimination. Huge price discrimination. The other one is big versus small. Do railroads give a deal? Lower prices for big shipments or small shipments? What do they charge more for? A lot more for small. A lot more. They would give deals to big customers. Give rebates to big customers. Ideally, a railroad would want to load it once by one customer and unload it another time by another customer. Another price discrimination. Do they charge more for long hauls, like from Seattle to Chicago, or short hauls, like Helena to Townsend? What do they charge more per mile, short or long? A lot more for short. A lot more, like 20 times more. Why? Ideally, a railroad would want to pay for it. It's called break of bulk charges. To load it once, have it go all the way, and unload the whole thing at once. Small farmers are caught in the middle. Now, it's not just farmers, it's small businesses. It's small production. They are hammered by this. Big get deals, small get crushed. Hey, is it like that today? 1000%. Amazon takes huge advantage of that. So does Walmart. In Walmart, that's how Walmart got big, taking advantage of those deals. So that is price discrimination. Small farmers getting crushed by this. Red meats are great. Nah, well, wait a second. Trucking does the same thing. It happens with tariffs too, but that's a big one. Another one, deflation. And this is government policy. Deflation. To keep inflation low. Deflationary policies. Now, in the nature of a modern capitalist economy, even though not quite what it is today, prices always go up a little bit. So when I say deflationary policies, I mean really, really low inflation. And maybe even outright prices drop. But the big, like today, if they say deflationary, they mean almost no inflation. We have pretty low inflation right now relative to what it used to be, let's say in the 70s, but it's still about 3%. And about I'll jump again. About 3%. But back then it was less than 0.5% inflation. And sometimes prices were actually dropping. Why? The gold standard. The Coinage Act of 1873, farmers would call the crime of 73, where they pulled the greenbacks out of circulation. They pulled those greenbacks. And made everything valued to gold. And what happened was, if you mined gold, let's say you had a gold mine, you had to sell your gold to the government. In the Coinage Act of 1873, you had to sell all of it to the government. And then they would coin it. And then back currency with these coins. They would make gold coins, sometimes gold bricks and gold ignites, but mostly gold coins. They would pay for it. So you had to sell it. But they would back currency with it. So if you had $1 worth of currency, you could go to any bank and say, I want $1 in gold. And they would give you $1 worth of gold. So mine it, they got to sell it, and then that's how they would distribute. Now, the problem was there was only so much gold. And because of that, as the economy grew, it was a basically fixed amount of gold, you have deflation. The value of the gold went up. All the way until 1898. This was a massive problem. Now, what happened in 1898? Does anyone know what happened in 1898? It happened in Alaska. Gold rush. All of a sudden, a massive gold rush in northern Alaska. Sometimes you might see it called the Yukon gold rush. Really amazing story of the gold rush in Alaska. But even a bigger one, like 100 times bigger, in South Africa. All this gold into circulation, and that allowed for a little bit of inflation. But this kept prices down. What farmers wanted was more inflation so prices would go up faster. Also, regressive taxes, specifically the tariff. Now, tariff generally leads to more inflation, but not the way the farmers want it. Tariffs raise the prices for manufactured goods. Farmers don't manufacture goods, so they got to pay more for their mechanical reaper or their, windmill-powered plow or windmill-powered pumps were a big deal for irrigation. All steel costs a lot of money. And so here's a couple examples of this. I love this one of the farmers. First one, here's farmers paying for the protectionist tariff, and the wealthy businessman back east got the money, is the way they saw it. Here's another one showing, here's the farmers with their, this is basically the railroad, I'm sorry, with price discrimination. And it's going to cost everybody, as they see as regular people are the tides about to be pressed by the railroad. The farmers warning them, but nobody respects farmers. They all think the farmers are stupid. Not a brain, like a scarecrow. So, this all leads to more debt. I'm referring to a story. I know. Yeah. So, debt. All of it leads back to debt. These are the problems that farmers are facing. Now, we have all these problems in the city, but farmers are feeling like no one's paying attention. So, they started two organizations, the Farmers Alliance, but the one we're going to talk about is the Grange. Oh, the Grange. And the Grange will be a nonpartisan organization, meaning they will not. Got the gun there. One second, everybody. There we go. Nonpartisan. They'll support whatever party will support farmer problems. Farmer problems? Agree. The problems that farmers are having. So for example, in Iowa or Minnesota, they supported Democrats. In Illinois and Indiana, they supported Republicans. So we don't care what party you are, will you handle our problems? The problem with that is both parties could take advantage of them. And the big one they wanted were state laws they literally dubbed the Granger laws. And the Granger laws would regulate railroad rates, really regulate railroad rates regularly, rapidly. Is there a lot of alliteration there? Maybe too much for all of us. Meaning, do something about price discrimination. So basically, they would say you can no longer charge more for monopoly. You can no longer charge more for big versus small. At least put some kind of controls on it. The problem is, it's only within a state. Like Illinois would be one of the first ones to do it, but pretty soon, all the states in this area did it. And railroads were furious. That's a big hunk of their profit. Wherever they have a monopoly, they can jack up the charges. And then make up for lowering their prices where there's competition. Now, don't write this down. Don't write this first part down. There was a court case. Just don't write this one down. One versus Illinois, where you can't one, but it won't be on the test. That the grades will be on there. One versus Illinois, this court case said it's okay it's constitutional to regulate railroad rates. Railroads tried to sue, and that terrified them. But then do you remember the three compromises to the Constitution? The Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise, and then the slave trade. That said Congress does not have to, or Congress cannot touch the slave trade for 20 years. Congress would have the power to regulate what we call trade in between states. Say it again, interstate commerce. So what railroads started to do, for example, the Illinois Central Railroad kind of ran this way. It's gone. We're talking 1880. And so they had branches also that went like Indianapolis, eventually down to New Orleans. Let's say you're taking corn. Why not? Corn. From Peoria to Chicago. Great shot in the Illinois Central. They would start going to Indianapolis first. Why? Cost savings. And then say, states can't regulate interstate commerce, so the Granger laws don't apply, and they sued again. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and what we call, okay, part of the Illinois Central line was the Wabash Railroad, so it's called the Wabash Railroad case. And it said, the interstate commerce, states can't regulate. And it destroyed the Granger laws. This was a stunning defeat for the Grange. Stunning. They had this political victory and then they were dashed. And by the mid-1880s, the Grange began to lose popularity or lose power as a political movement. The Grange remained, as there's still a lot of farmers. Farms are very isolated, so the Grange would be an organization where farmers could come together. Granger halls would be set up where they could have like dances and things like that, because it's lonely if you're out on the isolated farms. And so I just still remember as a little kid going to things like the Granger Hall north of Miles City up here, because it was set up for farmers back in the 1930s. And this tried to present the farmer as the yeoman, a Jeffersonian master of his land. But they didn't have power. They did have a couple of successes. They would set up a mail order store to get things for farmers shipped by railroad called Montgomery Ward's. That was a really big store until it mismanaged in another Walmart. Drove out of business in the early 1990s. They also set up an insurance company for farmers to have insurance. That's still around today. By the insurance company? Farmers. Farmers Insurance was started by the Grange. So, but here's the essence of this. Farmers Alliance would try the same thing, but they realized only the federal government could do it. And that meant the national political parties and both parties, at least the farmers felt, were ignored. And that was partially true. A lot of the reason why is you have these cities just exploding in size. And with the cities growing so big, Chicago went from 100,000 to 1 million people in about 30 years. All these cities were ballooning in size. They have their own political issues that seem totally different than what farmers were going through. And this would set up the era of the political machines. And these are urban political machines. So you have all these people coming to the cities, overcrowding, housing prices were out of the world. People were packed into miserable apartments called tenements. We have internal migration and external immigration. Think about all these farmers with mechanization. They were having large families, and now there's nothing for the kids to do. Off to the city. So you have one of the biggest times of migration and immigration in American history happened in the 1890s. Was there something similar in the 1990s? 1980s and 1990s? The remnants of the small towns just begin to disappear. It's go to the small towns in Montana today, and that's why they look the way they do. But they didn't have any services in these towns. They weren't set up for like garbage collection. There was no professional fire department. They were all private little fire departments that would demand high prices to come to put out your fire and rob you as they put out the fire. They were basically criminal organizations. Police forces were sketchy and very corrupt. There was little or no sewage collection, garbage collection, nothing to do about rain or flooding in the city. There wasn't anything like police infrastructure for schools, infrastructure for paved roads or for cleaning streets. I mean, we'll go on and on and on. Cities were not planned and built on top of each other. And you can see remnants of that in every city. We see it in Helena. You notice how you go through Last Chance College to the downtown area and how all the weird one-way streets and streets don't make much sense. That's kind of the remnants on a very small scale of no plan. Imagine it on a city like Chicago, which is ballooned hundreds of thousands of people every year or every decade. So who stepped into the vacuum? The political machines. Machines would step in and provide the public services. Political machines, the Democratic or Republican Party, especially Democratic Party, because they were more the party that would try to influence or try to get immigrants voted. The Democratic Party. So the party would come in and say, you vote for us and we'll provide sewage. You vote for, yeah, that didn't sound right. We'll provide sewers, not sewage. We'll provide a fire department, a professional fire department, street cleaning, garbage collection. All those things now that we just assume happens, even though we do pay taxes, they didn't exist before. The machines did it. When migrants would come off the train in Chicago from rural areas, from rural Wisconsin, and get there, oh my God, Chicago's crazy. They would be met by somebody from the machine. They were Democrats. And they would meet them and say, let me help try to find a home. Let me try to find a job. Here's a little bit of food to get you through. The machine would do it. And all they would ask in return is what? Remember who did it for you and vote for us. Did it work? Wow, did it work. The machines could reliably bring out the vote. Democrats in, let's say, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, New York. The entire state of Ohio was a Republican machine. Los Angeles, that was booming going into the 20th century, was a Republican city. And just the machine had power. Even in Helena, Butte was part of a Democratic machine. And then basically Eastern Montana was Republican. And Helena had a Democratic machine. That's the Democratic machine would be the reason why the statue of Thomas Francis Meagher would be put on the Capitol. That's power. And then what else did they ask for? One other little thing. Turn your back when we commit, it's called graft. Graft is literally stealing from government contracts. What they would do is this. Okay, they're building all these things, courthouses, roads, streets, sewers, and they would inflate the contracts. For example, the Democratic machine in New York built this magnificent courthouse. And it's still pretty cool, even though years of soot and back, there used to be a lot more pollution in cities. That's kind of ruined part of it. They built this beautiful courthouse that would have cost over $1 million, which was a lot of money in 1873. That's a lot of money. Anybody want to guess what they built the city? The actual money they appropriated for this? 10 million. So they overinflated nearly $9 million. So who got rich? The contractors building it. They padded their contracts and took money, and then they turned around and gave politicians money under the table. We call this return kickbacks. Kickbacks. And it was so blatant that eventually the head of the New York machine would have to run away and be eventually caught. Hey, does this happen today? Is that what I'm thinking? So, kickbacks. It happens today all the time, still happens a lot right now. But in New York, the most famous political machine was Tammany Hall. It was a meeting hall, and the Democratic Party ran New York. In fact, the head of the party was William Tweed. Remember Thomas Nash who did the cartoon of the elephant and Santa Claus? I showed you those, and the elephant of the Republican Party. He saw it as his mission to attack the corruption of the machine and drew so many cartoons. Here he is stealing the voting booth. And they count the votes. His name was Boss William Tweed, and they called the leaders of the party a boss, a political boss. And part of the reason they call him that is because he wasn't elected to anything. He just ran everything. So the mayor and the entire city council were all Democrats, almost all Democrats, and they followed the boss. And when organized crime really began to pick up in the 1890s, they started calling, in the United States, started calling the head of an organized crime family bosses after the machines. Now, eventually, because of the courthouse and a few other things, it was so blatant, he fled the country. And he was captured in Spain and extradited back to the United States. And they captured him because Nat's cartoon of were so popular, everyone recognized him for cartoons. He'd be replaced by William Plunkett, Boss Plunkett. And Plunkett would call what they did honest graft. We're doing good things. We're providing parks, city squares, sewage collection. Sewage collection, that's something weird. Once again, I'm having trouble with the sewage business. Police, whatever. I said, we're doing good things. It's honest graft. Should we profit a little bit? Well, of course, they're profiting a lot. And so this corruption would taint city government. Now, let me ask you something. Are the machines good or bad? And the answer is yes. They provided services that didn't exist. And they went and tried to help people that were at the bottom of the economic ladder, who were getting nothing. So you could argue that's a good thing. But at the same time, there's graft. And pretty soon, what became more important for machines going into the 20th century? Providing services for the graft. The money. The money became more important. And this will be an issue down the road. But do they care about farmers' issues? You see the problem that farmers are having. The machines are growing in power. Like the Ohio Republican Party will be run, the state political system will be run by one man, Marcus Hanna. By 1896, Hanna could pick the president. And I mean literally pick the presidential nominee. By 1896, Hanna's man became president, William McKinley, a solely owned entity of the Republican political machine of Ohio. That's power. Oh, this is the cartoon Nash drew of Plunkett. Not even a face, just a money bag. So, in the national political structure, you have farmers demanding rights, machines growing in power, all these corporate changes, all this stuff is going on, and we have an election. We haven't had an election for a while in class. The last election we had was 1876. Remember when Rutherford B. Hayes replaced Grant? And he was elected with the compromise of 1877 that ended Reconstruction. Does that sound familiar to everybody? Well, 1880, the Democrats see their opportunity. Now, the Democrats are still tainted by the Civil War. They're dominated by the South, but they pick a Northerner, Winfield Scott Hancock, the Union hero of the Battle of Gettysburg. So they pick a Union general. They had a hung convention too. So they picked Hancock, thinking, you can't accuse us of being traitors for the Civil War. We're picking Hancock. It was his corps that held the Union center at Pickett's charge at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was horribly wounded in battle. The Republicans were in absolute disarray. And their big issue was patronage, the giving of government jobs. It became big business to support a presidential candidate and then get a plum job, like to become an Indian agent and commit graft, or head a customs house, they collect tariffs, and graft. It became big money. I give to a candidate, I get a job. It's called patronage. It's kind of the remnants of the old spoil system, but it's turned very corrupt. There were two different groups in the Republican Party. The stalwarts, sometimes called conservatives, even though that's not quite right, they were pro-patronage. It's a good system. We're all benefiting. Versus half-breeds who wanted reform. And they split the convention in Philadelphia, which was a crazy convention. Nobody got the clear nomination. All these different people were running. Nobody had a clear majority. Grant wanted to be president again, but he was tainted with all those scandals and therefore was stuck with the stalwarts. Now, let's get back to economics. But regardless of half-breed or stalwarts, the majority were conservative of both sides. They basically believed in laissez-faire. Social Darwinism was becoming the dominant philosophy of the Republican Party and the Democrats. Do you remember the term for a candidate who is unknown, coming out of nowhere, gets the nomination? You remember that term? Of course. A dark horse came in. In fact, he wasn't even running at all. He gave a nominating speech for Grant. He didn't really want to do it. Civil War hero, one we haven't talked about, congressman from Ohio, great reputation of being impeccably honest. He was allied with the half-breeds, but not necessarily one of them. But he wasn't a stalwart. His name was James Garfield, a dark horse. And by acclamation, it just happened. Against his protest, he got the nomination. He didn't want to be president. Now he's the presidential nominee. And this would be a nasty campaign. From the beginning, stalwarts were furious. So they wanted their man. And they picked one of the most corrupt government officials. He was never elected to office. He ran the customs house, which collected tariffs in New York, and was known for accepting bribes and kickbacks. His name was Chester Arthur. But to appease the stalwarts. Now, you notice I'm mentioning the vice president. Normally we don't have time to go into the vice presidents. That's what we call shadow. So, and nasty. Here's Garfield. And he's got the stalwarts dragging their corruption. And then there's Hancock, and he's dragging secessionists from the Southern Democrats. A bitter campaign, nasty campaign. Let's jump right to here. Republicans, though, had the advantage, and this is the last time they would violently use, and it was, the bloody shirt. The bloody shirt. Accusing their Democratic opponent of treason. They caused the blood of traitors, or drawn the blood of traitors because of the Civil War. Now, Garfield did not want to use it. So it's kind of being forced upon him right here, the bloody shirt, because they're accusing the Democrats of being traitors. The Democratic standard bearer is Winfield Scott Hancock, a Union hero, and they're calling him a traitor. That gives you an idea how bitter the politics were. The great Hancock, as he was known, a traitor to the United States. He nearly died against a traitor. But don't remember the first party's Republicans called George Washington. So once again, people say, we've never seen such acrimony in politics as today. Well, that happens time after time. Garfield would win a razor-thin victory. Razor-thin. Garfield's in red. Hancock's in green. I did search hard for this one. I do find it kind of funny. Who voted for Hancock? States of the former Confederacy. The Union hero. But Garfield was elected. But almost immediately, Garfield, who actually tried to do something to help voters in the South, Republican voters, AKA black voters, vote. He tried and did a few things like that. His administration would be bogged down with patronage too. 2 times a week, people would start lining up at the White House to go try to talk to Garfield. He allowed him to come in. I mean, line up outside the front door, which seems so funny today. Line up to come literally knock on the door and ask to see the president. He saw everybody. And what would they do? Ask for a job. And it just bogged down the whole thing. And the fight between stalwarts and half-breeds, the Democrats tried to stop everything. And one of those job seekers was a man from Ohio by the name of Charles Guiteau. Guiteau had some issues, but he was convinced that he helped Garfield become president, and therefore Garfield should give him a job. Not only give him a job, Garfield then, that job should be the ambassador to France. He wrote a couple letters to the newspaper, but he was so delusional, he believed that got Garfield blank. He even saw Garfield, came into the office and talked to Garfield, into the executive office. And Garfield's like, don't ever let this man think. It's crazy. He even tried to accost Garfield's wife, members of the cabinet, demanding the job. Eventually, he became convinced that Garfield was a harbinger of evil and destroyed the country. And he bought a very cheap carriage and waited for Garfield. Now, this was at a time when there was no guards for the president. Now, some of you might be thinking, for good reason, hey, wasn't Lincoln assassinated? Should we kind of worry about this? They thought that was an aberration of the Civil War. Garfield would take routine walks and once a week or sometimes twice a week, he would walk to the train station and take a train back to Ohio. His wife hated Washington, D.C. and spent a lot of time out in Ohio. And so he was going to the train station to meet his wife. This time his wife was at a different spot. We're going to go meet her. And Guiteau knew and would wait there. A couple different times, Guiteau waited and let him walk by. This time he didn't. Pulled out his revolver and opened fire. Just up the field. No guards. And then Garfield would go through hell for 3 months. He lived for 3 months. Why? Or what was Guiteau's first statement after he was assassinated? First off, there is being hit. You're a job, an office, or your life. A job seeker. But that's his statement. You have to write this down. I'm a stalwart. Even though during the election he claimed he wasn't in his letters, he had some issues. And he would proceed to hang on for a few months with a bullet. They tried everything possible. They bled him, they stuck probes in him, they did exploratory surgery, they could not find the bullet. They thought they had to get the bullet out. Here was a picture in one of the newspapers showing where they eventually found the bullet lodged next to the vertebra. They poked, prodded it. Even Alexander Graham Bell came up with a kind of rude invention he had, kind of a method to try to find the bullet. Couldn't find the bullet. That's Alexander Graham Bell. Didn't work. All their poking and prodding would eventually lead to an election and massacre. If they wouldn't have done it, he might have lived. Even at a time without antibiotics, he might have survived. But they put him through hell. And he wanted to be of clear mind, even though he was in pain all the time, so he would not take morphine. So agony. Nobody was more scared than Chester and Arthur. When Garfield died, Arthur became president. And Arthur, the symbol of patronage and corruption, would be the president who would sign the Pendleton Act. And that reformed civil service. It's such an ironic twist. Chester A. Arthur would sign to create a professional service. Why? Most government jobs are going to be professional. And you must show you're qualified by taking a civil service exam. If anybody here has relative to a federal job, they have to take a federal civil service exam. And did I put an exam? Yeah. And they would be professional. So even if there's a new president, most government jobs are going to be permanent. So you have a steady state of the bureaucracy, and therefore the president just can't hire or fire people based upon their political whim. To a professional civil service. Now, this could lead to some, civil service being pretty calcified and not able to change, but also makes it harder for a president to just put in their political cronies or their own and people to do their whim. I should have President Trump has basically not taken hire anybody, he's fired more workers than anybody since this. And the Supreme Court has hemmed it hot on it. There's another case coming to it. We're in the middle of that right now. But that's the ironic twist about Chester A. Arthur. Every state would follow suit. So if anybody has a relative who is a state employee, there's a change in governor, most of the jobs stay the same. There are some higher level positions or political appointees, but most are the same. In Helens, there's a very good chance some of you have a relative in either one of those two, because Helena is also a big federal government town. And Arthur, nobody really wanted to run again. I should add that as a president, he's made a lot of money. It's pretty brutal, cutthroat politician. Each of that tells Guiteau or Guiteau shopper. Oh, Guiteau would be excellent. He also was kind of a weird guy. He would get involved as vice president with fighting people in bars, the vice president, which I found kind of amusing. He also was obsessed with pants. He had over 10,000 pairs of pants. He would change his pants sometimes 4 or 5 times an hour. That's not the weird part. For example, he paid a lot of money to get John Adams pants. Made a big deal how he'd wear John Adams pants. Now, he was a lot bigger than Adams, so Adams had altered to fit him, but these are John Adams pants. And walk out and put in a new pair of pants. So I find that I just find that interesting. So, in 1884, now the Democrats have their chance. Because of the taint of corruption and patronage, even though Republicans would be forced to sign, even stalwarts had to support the Pendleton Act, the Democrats could nominate somebody promising reform. And they nominated just an absolutely remarkable politician, at least in how far he rose in a short time. Grover Cleveland, right here, Grover Cleveland. In less than 2 years, he went from private citizen to mayor of Buffalo, New York, to governor of New York, to president in less than 2 years. Unknown to president. And that should give you an idea how people just wanted somebody different. Somebody who did not appear to be tainted by all those scandals in the past. Grover Cleveland. And he was called a goo-goo. A goo-goo. What does goo-goo mean? Good government. Goo-goo. So the Democrats could abandon the whole Civil War thing, don't even talk about what's happening in the South, and just say, we're going to reform it. And people wanted to change. And most people don't really follow it that close then or now. So it sounds different. It's different. But he also promised to do something about railroads. I'll do something about price discrimination. And I'll cut tariffs. I'll cut tariffs that would drop the price of manufactured goods help farmers out who are being hammered by low prices for farm commodities. He's a free trader. At least he said. And so here's railroad rates and the common people we trust. By the way, that's supposed to mean a toddler. And then beginning in the 1880s, there was a real movement all the way up until about 1915, 1920. There was a movement that said all children should be treated, it should be completely gender neutral. You generally kind of decide how people are born, how you treat males or female children, boys or girls. They should all be treated exactly the same. With the idea being, if we don't take their growing up in those years, they will grow up more natural and more healthy. And so, for example, all toddlers should be dressed exactly the same. So in kind of a white, kind of looks almost like a little dress, male or female, which of course kind of makes sense, easier to change something. That makes sense. But all the same, male or female, all these kind of white, or sometimes with a pattern like this, and that's what he's trying to show. So that's just toddler. That would all end going into the 1920s with a real worry that boys were becoming real men. So boys have to be treated differently. And you start seeing the prevalence of blue for boy and pink for girls. And girls got to be treated like what we call domesticity at an early age. So we'll come back to that. The Republicans, in disarray, would nominate James G. Blaine of Maine, who had been trying to be president for 8 years. But Blaine's problem was he was tied back with the Credit Mobilier scandal from way back when. Way back when. I should add one more thing before we go. Everyone look at Cleveland. He was a bachelor. And they really used that. Wow. I may actually show it to that. Some of you now will swoon and not be thinking for the rest of the period. Some of you will be jealous. Gee, I wonder if he's related to anybody in this life. Moving on. Everyone look at Uncle Grover before you go. You too.
Thank you.
Let's see ya.
Thanks.
Goodbye and good luck. What do we have here? Ah, that's very good. Beard bump. Oh, the head. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He kind of does have that, doesn't it?
Oh, I'd be like.
Let's go back to that real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's part of the way his head is turned, but yeah, it kind of does look like that. I like the bow tie.
Yeah, also not doing that.
How was the assembly?
Morning.
Some of you are too full of pep. Can you shut off the film?